Edition of Upper Echelon. Pretorius, a motor industry veteran, recently retired chief executive of McCarthy Limited, which is the motor arm of Bidvest. I say recently retired because that was as recent as March this year, after a very long career dedicated totally to the motor industry. Brunt, did you plan it that way?
I always had that ambition, Alec, because from an early age I was a car fanatic, and my hobby became my job, so I was very blessed.
Much to do with, or anything to do with, your upbringing in the Free State?
A lot to do with my elder brother, who sort of led me astray and instilled in me a love for cars, and then that developed into a strong interest in the motor industry.
You started off with, after going to Free State University, to where you got your MCom, so that's important, I guess, in your mind, having an academic training?
Yes, and I was in the fortunate position that at Toyota I was given the freedom to apply the academic knowledge that I gained at university.
Why Toyota? Why did you join them in 1973?
I identified very strongly with the late Dr. Albert Wessels, and Toyota was an underdog at the time. And so the culture of the company definitely appealed to me, and I thought that I could perhaps add value there.
What was it about him that you identified with?
He was a visionary. He lived in the future. He was like an eagle, and he had a very clear strategic vision, and he succeeded in inspiring all of us towards the attainment of that dream that he had.
It's quite funny, though. I suppose young people today would be saying they would love to have met a Dr. Albert Wessels and then been able to go ahead with it. Did you read a lot about him before? Was he a family friend?
He wasn't really a family friend, although he had a business called Vika, and Vika sold school clothes, blazers, and my late father was a school principal. So I did meet him, but I learned an enormous amount from him, and even before I joined, I was well aware of what he stood for.
It's quite interesting as well, in that many young black guys coming through today would be looking for their role models. Albert Wessels was, I guess, one of the first Afrikaner business people to really achieve really very big. Did that play any part in your thinking?
It did, because I grew up in the rural Free State, and my background is very Afrikaans, and I certainly identified with what he was trying to do in the motor industry, and his main competitors were the international companies, namely Ford and General Motors and Volkswagen.
And how did you manage it as a team at Toyota to come from the underdog to be the undisputed leader?
We implemented what I would call a fully integrated marketing strategy, and we did that in a very consistent manner. And market research assisted us a lot. So we developed a marketing platform that was sustainable, and it was encapsulated in the slogan, "Everything keeps going right."
You had a good product as well.
Without a good product, one cannot get out of the starting blocks. So good product, good quality, offered outstanding value, and we managed to position it as a no-risk purchase. And we were quite fortunate at the time, because competition wasn't nearly as intense as what it is today.
Brunt, I'm sure you've had crossed swords with economists, perhaps people from other industries, who feel that the motor industry in South Africa has got an unfair shake. You've got the Motor Industry Development Program, which still exists today, that many say actually subsidize the industry. Yeah? How do you respond to that?
I see the motor industry in a very strategic light. It is a strategic asset that South Africa has got. It plays a major role from an employment point of view. It employs more than 300,000 people. This year it will earn 100 billion rand in forex, and it's playing a very meaningful role, a lot of technical expertise. It's developed into a center of excellence. It's a global member of a respected member of the global automotive industry. So I believe one should look at the industry in perspective. And yes, there is a degree of subsidization, but that happens all over the world.
When I was a young reporter, I remember being told that the motor industry is important because it makes up 5% of gross domestic product. Now, I haven't had a look at it lately, but I'm sure you must have some kind of an idea of what its contribution is to the economy.
Yeah, 6.5% at present, and the local industry, in my opinion, will flourish under the APDP, and the target is for the industry to produce 1.2 million vehicles by 2020 and to export at least half of the quantity produced. So I have no doubt that the strategic significance of the motor industry will increase.
Now, your son is a professional rugby player, but if he hadn't been that good at sport, would you have suggested he goes into the motor sector?
Yes, I think it's one of the most dynamic and fascinating industries that one can ever dream to work in. It's highly competitive, it's fast moving, and certainly I look back and I'm just so grateful because it's been an enriching and rewarding experience.
You moved away from Toyota in 1995 to go to McCarthy, which brought the biggest challenge of your life. But at the time, I recall, many of us external observers were surprised. You were on your way to bigger and even greater things at Toyota, yet you decided to take on this kind of challenge.
Yeah, I wanted to learn new things because I spent 22 years at Toyota, and the retail side of the motor industry always fascinated me because the retail side represents the cutting edge of the motor industry because one interfaces with customers there on an ongoing basis. And so the McCarthy challenge had a lot of appeal for me, and it also entailed a change in lifestyle. So a supplementary objective was I wanted to perhaps restore some balance in my life.
The lessons that you learned there surely didn't come from too much balance. You were given all kinds of challenges that you might never have expected.
Yes, it didn't turn out as I anticipated. But I'm not complaining about it because the recapitalization and the restructuring of McCarthy was an incredible learning experience for me and also a humbling experience. So I do not regret for 1 minute that I took that opportunity.
Apart from learning about the perils of having too much debt, what was the other big lesson you took from that?
It's a tough world out there, so one shouldn't expect any sympathy. One should just accept responsibility, focus on the results. And I also realized that without the assistance of capable and committed people, I couldn't achieve anything. So I learned some very powerful leadership lessons.
Looking back on that, did you feel that the contribution from the banks was a hindrance or a help?
I'm very grateful that the banks decided to recapitalize the group and they gave us another chance. And the 3 years that I spent reporting to 8 banks was also interesting for me. They ensured that we were extremely focused. They wanted us to optimize our cash flow, repay the debt, and from a governance point of view, I learned valuable lessons. So I'm grateful that the banks gave McCarthy a lifeline.
The other surprise was when Brian Joffe's Bidvest acquired McCarthy at a rock bottom price back many years ago. You decided to stick with it rather than perhaps just to hand over a little bit of stewardship. You were still in the hot seat, in fact were until March this year. How was it different for you in running an embattled business that you managed to pull right to then becoming part of a very successful group?
It was yet another fascinating phase of my career. I had the privilege of working with I would say one of the most brilliant entrepreneurs in South Africa, and for that matter, one of the top entrepreneurs in the world. And the Bidvest culture was a new experience for me, very nimble, fast-moving, quite a tough culture, results-driven. So yet again, I was blessed in the sense that I learned many new things during my period at Bidvest.
If you were to contrast the cultures between the Toyota that you worked at, the McCarthy that you ran, and the Bidvest that you were until recently part of, what would stand out?
Bidvest certainly has a more short-term, very results-driven culture, perhaps a tougher culture when it comes to delivering against shareholder expectations. Whereas in particular at Toyota, it had more of a long-term focus, more emphasis on strategy and longer-term sustainability, and perhaps a greater willingness to invest in the softer side of business.
Sounds to me like, in a way, if you could have your life again, you might have stayed with Toyota.
No, because then I would have missed out on many valuable lessons that I learned both at McCarthy and because of my exposure to the highly successful Bidvest culture.
And now, Brunt?
Yeah, I want to continue learning, so I have accepted 6 non-executive directorships, all outside of the motor industry, so I'm learning a lot. I'm spending a reasonable amount of time teaching whatever I learned, so I have an association with some business schools and universities. I also do a fair amount of mentoring and coaching. I do a little bit of public speaking on leadership and business success, and then I want to serve more. So I serve on the boards of the National Business Initiative, Business Against Crime, the Reed Educational Trust, the Valued Citizens Initiative. I'm playing a role as an ambassador in the National Values Campaign, because we live in a country where the needs are overwhelming. Yes, there is also an abundance of opportunities, but this is a place where one can certainly make a difference every day, and I am going to try and do my best to bring that about.
And quite a lot of those areas that you spoke of would be, I suppose, in trying to make business more palatable. It's not celebrated in South Africa. In fact, if one considers that investment is directly related to business confidence, we seem to be sometimes shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I believe the South African business sector is already doing an enormous amount in terms of the development of human capital and the upliftment of communities, but we have to accept a co-responsibility for the creation of a better future, and we can't afford to be similar to capitalists in New York and London. And once again, I say we are privileged in the business sector because we have the resources, and we can really go out there and ensure that tomorrow is going to be better than today.
And the new growth path, do you think that from everything that you've seen of it and analyzed of it and engaged on it, that it is moving us in the right direction?
Yeah, I don't agree with all the components, and perhaps I would have put emphasis on different things, but there is a clear direction now, and my view is, should we take the activities of the National Planning Commission and then put the emphasis on successful implementation, then certainly we can ensure a more prosperous future for South Africa and all its people.
One of the great Federal Reserve governors of the United States, in fact, the father of Katharine Graham, who's well known from the Washington Post days, and Richard Nixon and so on, said that from 20 to 40 is learning, 40 to 60 is earning, and 60 upwards is serving. Now, if you were to sit back, perhaps when you sit on your stoep as an 80-year-old drinking your coffee, how would you be able to define that the serving period of your life, or how would you judge that as having been a success?
Yeah, if I had succeeded in making a difference, touching lives, if I had succeeded in getting more people to realize their God-given potential, so to become a more significant person, to achieve through others, and to ensure that really, when one leaves this earth, that people would say his life was a blessing from many points of view. That would be my objective.
Brian Pretorius, the recently stepped down Chief Executive of McCarthy Limited.
Upper Echelon was brought to you by Deloitte. For innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning, turn to Deloitte.